Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is Justin Richard here again with Minegoziibe Anishinabe Member Spotlight. Today, we're very honored to welcome Mr. Kevin Chief here. Kevin Chief has done a million different great things in his life. We've been friends forever. I approached him a couple months ago about coming online and talking with the membership, and he cleared some space for us, and we appreciate having him here. Kevin, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. And it really is an honor. And I'm glad that I can connect with some of my fellow band members and families and cousins and relatives. And I got to say, man, that's a way to welcome me is to wear that Wasak Jets Indigenous jersey. I love it.
I'd love to say that it was by accident, but I totally did it on purpose. I'm doing it for you, buddy.
Yeah, I love it.
Speaking about Wasak, tell me a little bit about it. How did Wasak come to be? What were the original goals of the program? Have you achieved those goals? And Wasak Night, tell me about that.
Well, so Wasak got started with two of my good friends, Ron Chartrand. He was a former vice president. He passed away now with the Manitoba Métis Federation, and my good friend Pino Pisano. And we had this idea for Wasak because we realized that could we come up with something around sport, recreation, and cultural activities that could engage young people. And a big part for me was to try to shape, as you know, we both grew up in the North End, and it was so hard for us to find summer jobs and to find summer jobs in a way that was going to help people. And I was coming off this work with the Center for Aboriginal Human Resource Development. And what we found back around that time is all of the young people that were working in the North End of Winnipeg, none of them were actually from the North End. So when you looked at the summer youth drop-in centers, you looked at the swimming pools, the wading pools that were open, children's drop-in programs, none of them were actually from the North End. And we couldn't get those jobs. Mm-hmm. So we thought to ourselves, well, let's start an organization. Let's that we could put emphasis on sport, rec, and cultural activities. The emphasis on recreation was important because we understood that not everyone's an athlete, and recreation gets you in more organized games and activities. But cultural activities as well at that time was just starting to emerge. People were starting to get more into reclaiming some of the songs and doing things like dream catchers. And then we also knew that the NAIG Games were a possibility in 2002. And so we thought, well, we could develop some athletes, we can do some leadership development. And I thought, man, this would be a great for our community for summer jobs. And so we started Wasak back in 1999. It started with 4 staff and maybe 20 kids in a kids camp, and away we went, and we've grown ever since.
Yeah, I remember both of my older kids went to the Wasak program, and even going back a little farther, I do remember, like you said, all I ever wanted was that job at the swimming pool.
Right.
I wanted to sit at the swimming pool, the wading pool with the blue shirts or whatever, catch some sun and stuff. But yeah, I never even got a call back. You're right. You're absolutely right about that.
We put an emphasis too, I should say, is that we weren't really trying to build better athletes. What we were trying to do is we partnered with schools, and we were trying to extend the school day of young people. So after school programs, weekends, summer programs, so that we could make it so that young people would improve academically. And then so we wanted to put emphasis on helping graduate. And then we also started to seek out bursaries and scholarships to help them go on to post-secondary. So it was always an education emphasis at Wasak with some leadership development.
And do you feel that you've achieved a lot of those goals?
Oh yeah, for sure, 100%. And I mean, we've been fortunate because the big model for Wasak has always been about partnership. And one of the things that we realized, and it was probably one of the most significant awards that I've ever got recognized for, is in my first year at the University of Winnipeg, I was one of the first recipients for the Manitoba Aboriginal Youth Achievement Awards. Ooh. And back in that time, in the 90s, and we both know this, it was better to not tell people you're Indigenous. It was better to not point that out. You know, people knew, they could tell by the way you looked, they could tell by our last names, but we didn't draw attention to it. And I remember that night, my coach, Bill Wedlake at the time, he was so proud. He was one of the people who nominated me for it. And I just remember about 1,000 people coming to celebrate alongside of all these other Indigenous youth that were winning for these other categories. And at that time, it really it was probably the first time that I felt really proud to be Indigenous. I was always proud to be an athlete. I was always proud to be a North Ender, but I was that night celebrating being Indigenous was just so unique. And that was the Anishinaabe Awaji that did it for the very first year. And I couldn't believe it. And so WASAC has always been about promoting our Indigenous role models and showcasing them and telling the stories. Because if we don't use young people, if we don't tell those stories, what's going to end up happening, and I've always been worried about this, is we don't want to be defined by hardship and suffering and struggle. And so we want to be more defined by resiliency and being defined by successes and achievements to overcome that struggle. And so we have to tell those stories. And WASAC has done a very good job of promoting and highlighting the stories of success, achievement, and resiliency of Indigenous youth, young people, and highlighting the stories of our elders. And that has always been sort of the foundation of the organization.
Yeah, well, that's the purpose for me putting on these member spotlights, is because we got some great stories to tell. And I want to get those stories out there so that people can have role models and people to look up to, similarly to what they did for you that night at the Achievement Awards. You know,
Right.
we're looking for heroes all the time. Someone to let us know that, you know, we're on the right path, and as difficult as it is, if we just keep on going, then we're gonna see light at the end of the tunnel. And I appreciate that effort that you put in, and I appreciate you being there for them at that time. And so the WASAC night at the Jets, how did this come along?
Well, you know, about 20 years ago, I met Mark Chipman, and we had sort of a similar vision. And Mark wanted to make sure that as many young people could access the game of hockey and access sport. And this was long before the Jets were here. This was the Manitoba Moose. It was the Yearling Foundation. And so me and him became friends because we had this common goal to use sport connected to education. But within his idea was an emphasis on hockey. And so he wanted to partner with WASAC, and we wanted to partner with them. And we started the Little Moose hockey program. And we started in the North End, and we expanded it out. And we actually ran the program at lunch hours because we partnered with schools. And then the city arenas were always empty. And so we bring kids in, we give them lunch, we bus them there. They get great instruction from some of the best coaches at that time. And so we wanted to remove the barriers. But then what happened is when the Jets came back, me and Mark talked, and we realized like the scale is going to change. It's going to be way too big for WASAC. And we started the True North Youth Foundation so we could expand the hockey program. We could get into programs like Project 11, mental health promotion. You know, we could get into doing things like Camp Manitou. But WASAC has always been a partner with True North for the last 20 years. And I got to tell you, I've been very blessed to have a friendship with Mark. And the biggest platform that we have in Manitoba, the biggest platform we have in this country, and you could argue the biggest platform in North America, is in the National Hockey League. And in Manitoba, that's the loudest barn in the National Hockey League. And so we have something called WASAC Night, because you cannot talk about the history of Canada, and you cannot talk about the history of Manitoba without talking about this unique relationship with First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people. And so whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, it's a collective history. And so what we decided to do is, because we had this long-standing partnership with WASAC, could we promote our songs, our stories, our culture through the voices of children, youth, and our elders, and do it in the loudest barn in the National Hockey League? And
Absolutely.
so we decided to do that. And we were the first community, the first team to ban the headdress in the National Hockey League. And we did that as part of the Heritage Classic because, we did that initially. The banning of the headdress came to be, Mark phoned me. This is a very good story. Mark is going to share this next week, this story with the Southern Chiefs organization. He's doing a keynote on economic reconciliation.
We beat them to the press, everybody.
Yeah. So when we banned the headdress at that time, our current chief, Chief Nepanak, was the Grand Chief of Manitoba. I was MLA at the time for Point Douglas. And Mark called me. He said, there's something about the headdress coming in here. A guy came in wearing it. He was drinking. Something about it was off. So he asked me what I thought. And I shared with him about the significance that I knew spiritually about the headdress, that when there's a tragedy in our community, it's often the headdress that leads the peaceful protest, but at the same time, the healing for the family. If you go to a powwow, it's often leading the grand entries. But I said to Mark, like, look, you should call Grand Chief Neepanak, because I had to introduce Mark to Derek Neepanak at that time, and call Elder Whitebird and get their thoughts and advice. And so that's what Mark did. After consulting with them, the Jets was the first team in NHL to ban the headdress off the advice and guidance of Chief Neepanak and at that time Elder Dennis Whitebird. But then we were also the first team to do the territorial acknowledgement at a game, and we did that as part of the Heritage Classic. We're the first team in the National Hockey League to indigenize the logo. And so if you look at the National Hockey League now, and if you just look generally in sports, so much has started with this partnership between True North and this small Indigenous-led organization called WASAC. And it's rippled pretty much every team now in the National Hockey League is pretty much following what we've been led on.
That's funny, actually. My uncle, who you just met there, that's what he always says. Everything starts in Winnipeg. We see it first, and it really is true. A lot of those things, they start in Winnipeg. They spread across the league, and then everybody's proud.
I tell you, it's true. The first numbered treaty. Where did it start? Right here in Treaty 1 territory.
Yeah, it all starts here.
Yeah.
So, I mean, all these things are great and good, but it wasn't always like sunshine and rainbows for you. You do have some demons and some stories to tell about your youth that really shaped the way you are today and how you represent Indigenous people.
Yeah, you know, one of the things I've tried to do, and I do have some regret because I'm the former MLA for Point Douglas and I was a cabinet minister, so I had a pretty big platform. And I think one of the things that we have to try to do is to start talking about, or try to start having more conversations about our struggles and about our challenges. And you can't talk about an Indigenous perspective, unfortunately, without talking about alcohol and alcoholism. And it's been absolutely devastating for me and my family. My dad raised me since I was 5 years old in the north end of Winnipeg in a bachelor pad. And my dad ultimately passed away from alcoholism when I was 18. My family has really struggled with it. And one of the things that I found growing up is that this is why I love sports so much, because when I would go play basketball, sort of the chaos in my life and the struggles that we were having, I would forget about them. And I'd spend hours and hours in the gym. And well, when my university career ended, I played 5 years at the University of Winnipeg for the men's basketball team, graduated, got my degree. I didn't have that outlet anymore. And I don't think I ever really dealt with how big the impact it was to lose my father. And so what I started to do is I started to live that life right away. I started to drink. I started to drink heavy. I was binge drinking. I was fortunate. I ended up finding, after a number of years, finding some support. A good friend of mine, Chris Henderson, sort of directed me and guided me into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was spending some time there. But you know what happened? Not long before COVID came, my nephew, who's more like my little brother, I'm only about 3 years older than him, my nephew Brian, he was on the same path. He was drinking, and alcohol is a gateway into all sorts of other problems, harder drugs, harder lifestyle. And he ultimately ended up in Headingley Penitentiary. And he went into this program called the Winding River Program. It's a sobriety program at Headingley. And I would go visit him with my brother, my older brother. And one day when I was visiting him, he says, you know, Uncle, a lot of these guys know you in here because, you know, you're from the North End and you're a former politician. And they even remember you from basketball. He said, would you ever come in and tell your story, your sobriety story? And I got to tell you, one of the things that helped keep me sober, especially on weekends, is I would go look for they called birthdays, where you're celebrating your sobriety birthday. And I would try to find in Winnipeg who's celebrating a birthday, so I could go listen to the story. And I felt it was like medicine, because I'd get anxiety because it was very hard to stay sober on weekends. And I'd listen to somebody's story, and then I'd be like, oh, I feel I'm going to make it this weekend. I'm going to make it through. So I told Brian, I said, absolutely. I said,
well, how did you find these birthdays? How did you, in case anyone is curious?
I just reached out to Alcoholics Anonymous, and my friend Chris Henderson, who at one time was the Southern Grand Chief of Manitoba, we partied a lot together. He was already in AA, so he'd seek them out and I'd seek them out, and then we would go to these things together.
That's really interesting. Okay, sorry to interrupt your story.
Well, and that was important because then I got to not only listen to stories, but I got to learn how to share my own story. So when my sobriety birthdays came, I learned how to share my own story. And then I wanted to share my story because of by people sharing their story with me, it was good medicine. It helped me stay sober for weekends. And so I told my nephew, I said, yeah, I would love to come in, talk to the guard who put it together. And her name was Miss Reed. And I said, ask her if I could come, but to ask her if I can spend the day. I want to get to know all the guys in the program. And, it was a little bit tricky because when you go visit and you have a relative, there's some things you got to work through, and there's a lot of guidelines. And I went to Headingley, and I got to spend the entire day there with my nephew. And I tell you, it was an eye-opening experience. These guys, how they start their day there is they sit in the sharing circle. And so I come in, I sit down, I'm next to Miss Reed, the guard who put it together, and all these guys come in. And my nephew come in. My nephew's a big guy, and he's a really tough guy. And we're sitting down, and so my nephew's the second last guy to walk in. And I said to Miss Reed, am I allowed to go see him? And she said, yeah, that's why you're here. So I went up to him and I gave him a hug. And in a moment like that, you can't help but cry. And I sat down and I watched these guys, we're in a sharing circle, and how they start the day is they got to stand up and they got to say one thing they're grateful for. And I watch these guys stand up, and I tell you, what these guys said is no different than what anyone who's listening would say. Guy would stand up and he'd say, I talked to my mom back home last night. She's doing good. I'm grateful. Next guy would stand up and he'd say, I talked to my daughter. She's doing good in school. I'm grateful. When my nephew stood up, he just said, my uncle's here. I'm grateful. And in a moment like that, when people do that, you really see them. And I'll tell you, Justin, all those guys, about 80 guys in that program, all of them, with the exception of 2, they were all Indigenous. And they were all young, man. They're just kids.
Babies, yeah.
And it was so heartbreaking. And after that, I said to myself, when there's an opportunity, we should try to have more conversations about this.
Yeah,
we should try to highlight and do what we can. And my nephew just recently got released, and he's living in Hollow First Nation right now, and he's trying to stay sober. He's on the right journey. But I tell you, when we grew up, or when I grew up and you grew up, we were always told, in my entire life, I've never not had a relative in jail, but I've always been told, you don't tell people that, you keep it quiet. And then that kind of makes you feel a little embarrassed, a little shame about who you are. And I just don't think that's the right approach. I had my kids, my sons are 7, 9, and 12. And they would talk to my nephew. They talked to their cousin when they're in Headingley. I didn't want to shy away, but that's who we are. And we have to start putting this out there, and we have to start sharing this in a real way. And so I'm really glad that I have the opportunity to be able just to share a few words about what I think about that. And what I would say to anyone who's listening, or if you have a loved one who's struggling, is the first thing is you don't have to walk the journey alone. If you put just a little bit of effort, there are so many people that want to help you. For me, where I was fortunate in my journey to sobriety and I slipped a lot, but I found AA. And then from AA, I was able to transition into square dancing. I love square dancing.
Mhm.
I find it's good for my soul, keeps
Yeah.
me connected to the community. And culture has been a big part of my life to stay sober. Like that was my journey to sobriety. But I believe that every single person who's struggling right now, they have their own solution that's unique for them, and you have to seek it out. You have to try to do what you can. And if you're somebody who has a loved one who's struggling, just keep encouraging them. Keep encouraging them to try to do the best they can. And if you're somebody who's struggling, I can tell you, if you can get on that journey and you can start sharing your story, not only are you going to help yourself, you're going to be able to help a lot of people. And to this day, I'm grateful that that I could go to an AA meeting and listen to somebody's story. They
Mhm.
have no idea how much they shaped my life. And so we need to share more of these stories. We need to
Absolutely.
put more of these things out in the world in a good way to help people.
Well, and similarly myself as well. Obviously, I have my own story coming up from there, and the way that I did it was, and like you said, you have to talk to people. I when I was younger, I used to be out there, and I would latch on, and people would latch on to me because I would talk about how I like to party.
Right.
And as I got older, I realized that people that were positive in my life, when I would talk about the party, they would distance themselves a little bit from me.
Right.
And then the people who would take me down the party road would latch on a little tighter.
Right.
And I started
Right.
to learn that, okay, so if I put a little bit of myself out there with everybody that I meet, eventually I'm going to start surrounding myself with all the people that are going to help me nurture a
Right.
good life and create and help me travel down that positive road and
Right.
stuff like that. And it's meant dropping a lot of what I used to consider very valuable friendships,
Yeah.
or what I thought were very valuable friendships, with people who were really not very good for my well-being.
Right.
And so those were the most difficult connections to break. But once I broke them, I found myself living a more positive and meaningful life. And I hope that everybody, like you said, gets out there, talks to somebody,
Yeah.
and then they'll find their own way to turn down that good road, right?
100%. And so for me, I thought, and it brings it back to Wasak. I've dedicated my life primarily to Indigenous children and young people. And so, and trying to encourage them to learn how to share their stories, and you are who you surround yourself with. And so if we could continue to support people in that way, and encourage people to share stories, it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. So sports, like you said, sports have always been a huge part of your life. Walk us through your sports journey. Basketball obviously was a big part of your life, and how specifically did basketball shape the direction, or point you in the direction that you went in?
Well, I'll tell you the two most important values that comes with sport or recreation or cultural activities, because they're transferable. But for me, we'll just use the example of basketball, but this would be true for recreation or cultural activities. Is number one, it gave me a sense of belonging. So one of the things that we know is that if we don't give young people something positive to belong to, they don't wait for us. Someone will seek them out and get them involved in something negative.
Absolutely.
And so for me, where I got my sense of belonging is that no matter how well you teach curriculum in school, if you're not part of your school community outside of your classroom, you'll never truly feel like you belong in that school community. So for me, I got my sense of belonging at lunch hours, during intramurals, on weekends playing basketball, getting summer scholarships. The schools used to send me to basketball in the summer. So I got my sense of belonging. But here's the thing, like so many Indigenous people, part of our lived experience is also that we grew up poor,
Mm-hmm.
and we grew up in poverty. And so it became kind of common. It wasn't like I was the only kid in the North End poor. You were, a bunch of my friends were. So we were struggling in that way. But here's the thing. Every time I shot a basketball, my school's name was stamped on my chest. So I got a sense of generosity. I was getting a sense of contribution back to my school community because I knew that I was contributing back to that. And whether you're young or old, rich or poor, everybody needs to have a sense of generosity. And my dad always used to tell me, he used to say, my boy, no matter how much or how little we have, you can always make a difference because people always need help. So be willing to help people. And so those were the two values that really guided me. And then a part of that was there was so much struggle around me. There was so much drinking and some of that partying. And I wanted to sort of extend away from that. I wanted to, and then I thought to myself, well, I could go. And I loved sports. I loved volleyball and cross country and basketball, but I just fell in love with basketball. And so it was an outlet for me. It was something where I could just forget about the problems of my life and I could just play and I'd forget about everything and I could play for hours and hours and hours. And then what ended up happening is I could shoot a basketball better than most people. And I ended up getting an athletic scholarship. So the University of Winnipeg removed the biggest barrier I had in my life, which was economic. And that came at a really important time because in March of that year, my high school basketball season ended, but it was also the same month that my dad passed away. And so I really felt I was alone for the first time in the world. And Bill Wedlake, who was my coach at the time, provided me some support. He came to my dad's funeral, which right away built a lot of trust. Like I just immediately trusted him because, I looked up and there was my future basketball coach.
Uh-huh.
And then so I started school in the fall in that September. And I ended up playing on the men's basketball program there as a student athlete for 5 years. And I got to travel the country. I was the first in my family, not only to go to university, but the first in my family to even get to grade 10. I think my brothers might have made it to grade 9 or something. My brothers are much older than me. And the people that I met there, I got a university degree, traveled the country. I got to meet a whole network of people. The friendships that I developed there are still my good friends today. In fact, I look at somebody like Suk Singh, who I played basketball with. He runs a program here in Winnipeg called Attack Basketball. Now he's coaching my kids. The guy I played, who was my teammate.
My wife's always talking about sending the kids to Attack.
Yeah, because he runs this phenomenal basketball program, right? So it changed my whole network. But I got to tell you, one of the sad parts of it is that I don't remember seeing any other Indigenous players that I played against at the university level. I was rare at that time to see somebody who was Indigenous that was playing at the university level. And I mean, this too, man, growing up, we have such phenomenal athletes in our community. It is unbelievable. So there were other barriers that were hindering their ability to get to university. And I used basketball as a tool to go to post-secondary, to go to university. But it's so wonderful to see now, like we were just talking about Mason Chartrand and the impacts he's having and the team from Pine Creek. I was
fantastic ball players.
People all, coming off Manitowoc, everyone was telling me about this Pine Creek team and how amazing their 3-on-3 team is. And so you hear these incredible stories, and it's so wonderful to see. And I hope that for all the young people listening, whether it's sport or cultural activities, use that as your tool to get on to post-secondary, whether that's college or university or whatever it is. Try to use that as a tool in which to stay and get higher education.
Well, I do like your story about the representation, and having the name on the jersey. I'm actually seeing that a lot in the community. Counselor Harley and the rest of the counselors, they've done such an amazing job at getting hockey back in almost full swing in the community. And even my young son now is playing with the Pine Creek Warriors, and he just loves it too. He goes out, is Grayson playing? That's Harley's son. How's Grayson playing? I want to play Grayson, and he likes it. I'm playing with the Warriors. And it's a big production going into the match, right? So I'm really loving that. And that sense of representation is huge. I know it. I know it's huge. I see it in my children. I see it in the kids playing in the community. I see how happy they are putting on the jersey. and it really does mean a lot. And I'm thankful that that Pine Creek is making these moves towards reigniting the sporting activities within the community. And
yeah, so whether you're on the journey of sport, or let's say you're on the powwow trail, or let's say you're a singer, or you're square dancing, wherever that is, the reason that becomes important is because for athletes and for cultural performers, you can't tell young people something's possible. You have to show them. So I always share this story. I got on a bus. I was about 6 or 7 years old. I was with Chris Henderson. He grew up in the developments. And we got on this bus together in the North End 40 years ago, man. This is a while ago, right? We got on the bus, and I sat at the back of the bus, and Chris said, "Kevin, you see the bus driver? Go look at the bus driver." I went back. I looked at the bus driver, came back. He said, "Did you see him? The bus driver's Aboriginal. We could be bus drivers." It wasn't until we see, and that was 40 years ago. You didn't see somebody who was a bus driver who was Indigenous. It was so rare. And I thought about that bus driver. I thought, man, I wish I could tell him like what a role model he was to be able to get that job. And I thought about, if you think about it, just think of the overt racism he would have had to deal with every day. And I wish I could meet his family and thank them for the love and support they gave him to know that he would need to keep that job. I'd thank the people at Transit and say, thank you for making the system a little bit better so that people could have an Indigenous person be a bus driver.
Precisely.
One of those boys went on to be the Southern Grand Chief. The other boy went on to represent that very neighborhood in the Manitoba legislature. And when it comes to our athletes and it comes to our cultural performers, not only are they role models for, let's say, the skill that they have, whether it's on the field or on the ice, or it's a cultural performer, so maybe they're a singer or maybe they're a powwow dancer. Not only do they have to be good at their craft, but they always have this additional burden. And their additional burden is people always ask them to weigh into issues of racism, into issues of addiction, into issues of poverty. And so they carry this additional burden. And we're fortunate that they do that. But the most important thing when it comes to our Indigenous athletes, our Indigenous culture performers, and our Indigenous leaders is that they're proud of who they are, and they're proud of where they're from. And for so many of us, whether it was you or me or any of the people that are listening today, there was a time in our lives that we weren't proud of who we were, that we weren't proud of where we're from. And so we got to make sure that we're telling these stories, that we're showcasing these incredible role models, so that when other people look up to them, other children, their younger brothers and sisters, their nieces, nephews, cousins, go, look at that. Like you're seeing that right now with White Cloud in the NHL, like dealing with racism. The guy's trying to win a Stanley Cup at the highest level of hockey. And there he is weighing in on these hard issues. And we should be thankful and grateful that we have those role models to do that, because other young people are going to be dealing with that the same way.
It's true. That was the most that he spoke in the entire year.
The most
in the press.
Yeah. And at a time that the most critical time to try to win an achievement that's almost impossible to win. The majority of players who play in NHL don't. First off, it's almost impossible to get there. Then if you can get there to win a Stanley Cup, and here he is having to weigh in on these issues. And I think we're fortunate that we have role models like that, so kids can say, this is how you deal with that kind of racism.
Yeah, we joked.
This is how you deal with these problems.
We joked about it the other night when in game one he scored the winning goal. I don't know if you caught that, but he scored the winning goal in game one, and we actually said, I wonder if they're going to interview him after the game and talk about hockey,
right?
Or does he have to get back on and talk about his last name again?
Right?
but yeah, I know he's doing phenomenal. Montour in Florida, like there's a lot of role models out there for us.
Well, that's why you doing this, setting this up, trying to showcase people, trying to get the story, like those. I mean, that's how you build resilience.
That's right. We're trying to spread the Pine Creek success stories,
right?
And we're going to continue to do so. So many people. Always, like I've heard the story so many times in my life, and people says, when I grow up, I'm gonna change things. I'm gonna do things. I'm going to speak for our people. And you actually got the opportunity to do that. You were MLA,
Right.
Now the Point Douglas area. You got to speak for the neighborhood we grew up in.
Right.
You actually got to do it. Tell me about that experience.
Oh, it's unbelievable. The first thing is that when you're born and raised in a neighborhood that has given you so much, and then you're standing up in the chamber in the legislature to represent that very neighborhood, there's no feeling like that. And it makes everything you do, even if you just go for a walk, even if you're just going to the Safeway on the corner of Mountain and McGregor, if you feel everything you do feels so important. And that's why I always tell people it's going to be by far the best job that I ever have, was to represent the neighborhood. But you know what it does? It's a constant reminder. If you think about the people who supported you the most in your life, and whether it's you, Justin, or if it's any of my fellow band members or anyone listening, if you think about those people that loved you, that supported you the most, what makes them so unique, and those people that did that for me are the same kind of people who did it for you. What makes them so unique is, the first thing is that they provided all that support and love, and they didn't want anything in return.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing is, when you think about them, they actually got more joy in their life watching you succeed than they would ever get any joy of their own personal success. So you say to yourself, well, how do you pay people like that back? Because they don't want anything. Well, I always thought about those people. I thought about my dad, my family. I thought about the coaches. I thought about our teachers, all the people. And I thought to myself, if I can give back and help people in the way that they help me, I think that'd make them feel proud.
Mm-hmm.
I think that would make them feel proud. And so I try to represent the neighborhood in that way. I try to represent the neighborhood in the way in which people supported me, that helped me, that I could try to help families and people in that neighborhood. The other thing that was really important to me is that there was hundreds and hundreds of stories of hardship, of struggle about the North End. And there was hardly any stories of success or achievement. And I realized, I said, every story of hardship, every negative story you hear about the North End, there's hundreds of stories of resiliency, hundreds of stories of achievement, but no one tells those stories.
Mm-hmm.
These stories of hardship and these negative stories are so much easier to tell. And so I really wanted to try to be an ambassador to help people promote those positive stories, to say to people that if you think about people all over the world that came here in Winnipeg to make a better life for themselves, to be Ukrainian, Polish, the Jewish community, it was often the North End that they called home first, the Filipino community. And that's where they got their roots. They got their roots where they didn't have much. You think about Indigenous people from all over Manitoba. I mean, I could say that the R2W postal code probably has more Pine Creek band members in that postal code than anywhere else in this province. And so you got all these Indigenous people. And so when you've gone through your hardest times, and many people move on and they move to other parts of Winnipeg, or let's say other provinces, their heart is always in the North End.
Absolutely.
Their heart is always there. They're always a proud North Ender. And so for me, I understood that. And I tried to do what I could to remind people of that.
I drive by St. John's all the time. Tiger for life, I say.
Tiger for life. You cannot forget who you are.
Yeah.
You cannot forget about where you come from. And so to represent a neighborhood like that, well, the best way to say it is that it's the best job I'm ever going to have, and I'm so proud of it. And anyone who knows me knows that one of the first things I always try to do is to try to say I'm a proud North Ender, and I'm very proud of the roots that I have there.
Well, I talked to a lot of people in North End. The consensus seems to be that Kevin did a pretty decent job.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so you won there at least, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So these days, moving forward, how do you plan? What are your plans for staying connected with the community of Pine Creek and what's going on there and here in the city with the Pine Creek band members?
Well, I'm pretty fortunate for a couple of reasons. Number one is that I'm very proud of the work that Chief Nepanak's doing. So I'm very connected to Chief Nepanak. I'm proud of his leadership. I'm also good friends with you, so I stay connected as best I can. And there's so many things that we can do online now and stay connected. And I'm always so proud to see sort of fellow band members and my relatives that are doing such good work, and I stay connected to them. But a lot of the work I do is also trying to continue to provide support for the young people in Pine Creek and the Duck Bay area. So, for instance, our WASAC night every year, where we bring in young people from isolated northern communities, we bring in young people from Pine Creek, we bring in young people from Duck Bay, so they can go celebrate that game with us with the in the loudest bar in the National Hockey League. I'm part of I have a square dance troupe named after my late father, Norman Chief, called the Norman Chief Memorial Dancers. So that gets me out dancing at treaty days and all over the province. So I stay connected to that. And I got the Wally Ranville and those guys that play for me, and they're proud band members of Pine Creek as well. So I stay connected that way. A large part of my work is working in the community. And so there's just a real natural connection for me to stay connected to people. And I'm very fortunate that the work that I get to do now, I've been able to take sort of the best parts of the job that I liked as the MLA for Point Douglas, and to be able to continue to support children and young people and stay connected as best I can. I find that not only is that good for me and my family, but I also find that it helps keep me sober. It helps promote very good positive stories. And so I continue to plan on sort of living the life that I've been very blessed to have. And a big part of what I try to do now is trying to introduce my children to the culture, to their relatives, their connections back home. So
I actually got my daughter into the Pine Creek princess pageant.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So hopefully she sells enough books and becomes the 2023 Pine Creek princess. We're hoping for that. Is there a way that people can keep track of where your square dance group is, or is it just kind of somebody rings the bat phone and you kind of take off dancing?
Yeah, we promote a lot of our stuff on Facebook. So if they want to follow me on Facebook, we promote a lot of our square dancing gigs and stuff.
What are they searching for?
Just type in Kevin Chief and you'll see my square dance page there. And for me and our team, that's where we promote a lot of our things. And I think we're doing something like 15 gigs in June alone. Yeah. It's Indigenous History Month, and so we're dancing all over. And
it's a great group.
I'll have to connect with Chief and Council and make sure they get our square dance team up there. The founder of our team is actually, I call him my uncle. He's actually my cousin. He's from Pine Creek as well. The Pine Creek Duck Bay is Sonny Delarond. Sonny and his wife Terry are the ones that founded our team. And
there you go. Another connection.
Yeah, so we'll have to get back home and get up and do some jigging. I got to tell you, man, one of the best things that when I was in politics, I was known as Canada's only jigging politician.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah. So
that's quite the distinction right there. Holy smokes.
So I absolutely love dancing. It's so good for my soul. I love being in the community with our people. I love the thing I love about square dancing is that it's multi-generational. We have grandmothers dancing with the granddaughters. We have a dad dancing with his daughters. I find that the music transcends. I find that our elders and old people, they just love it. And so, maybe this is a bit of shout out to Chief Neepanak and Council to book the Norman Chief dancers at Treaty Days.
I was just going to say that. We should bring you guys out and put on a show at Treaty Days.
If we're invited, we'll be there.
All right. Yeah. There you go. But anyway, so that was great. It was awesome. I appreciate you coming down here. I'm very thankful that everybody gets a chance to look into a few days in the life of Kevin Chief.
Yeah.
Again, like I tell everybody, if you have anyone that you really want to spotlight, you know anybody who needs their story told, we're always looking for new people to interview. So drop us a line on the Pine Creek Facebook page, reply to the post here. Don't forget to check us out on YouTube, like and subscribe to keep in tune with everything that we put out there. It's not just member spotlights. It's important meetings, important announcements. Next month, we're planning on doing a segment directly with the chief. So look forward to that, amongst many other things that we have coming down the pipeline. But for now, I want to thank you all for joining in. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. Thanks, Kevin,
Miigwech, brother,
for stopping by. I appreciate it. And
Kachimigwech, everybody.
See you later.
Thank you.